What's up everyone, it's Sinistry, and recently I made a video on Dead by Daylight where I said that Behavior should consider adding a couple of different game modes to the game to keep it from being stale. So today I am going to share a couple of game modes that I came up with that could add so much more flavor to Dead by Daylight and keep people so much more engaged. We're going to run through 7 different modes that could basically exist as maybe like timed events or some other kind of rotating feature that could be in addition to the normal gameplay of DBD and would just add a bit of a variety for people who are getting kind of tired of the normal gameplay. If you like gaming analysis content about DBD and other games, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Most people who watch my videos are not subscribed to me, so it would mean a whole lot if you hit that sub button. But now let's jump into the first game mode. The first mode is called Rotating Killers, and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. You would have a normal round of Dead by Daylight, but every time the killer gets a hook, they would actually switch to someone totally different. This would be super chaotic for ways that I probably don't need to explain, but I will anyway. If you play as killer, you're going to have to be really good with all of the different killers if you want to stand a chance of making the most out of every switch. But since most people are not going to be great at every killer, it actually will take some of the tension out of the game and instead make it a little more silly, a little more chaotic, a little more bizarre, and you might see people do things that you didn't even think was possible with a killer just because they're totally not used to playing with this type of killer. But wait, what about the survivors? Are they just going to get a free win, especially if they're playing with a Swift? And to that I say no, because the last killer's effects would actually carry over to the new killer. That way you would be able to do things like, let's say your first killer is Trapper, you can lay down all of your traps, and then when you switch to Nurse, you still have all the bear traps all over the place, which adds a little bit of difficulty for the survivors to have to go up against. Now, depending on how much of an advantage survivors have, you could actually carry over every killer's perks and abilities and all of their like little special things they do. But if killers are pretty equally matched to survivors just with this one handicap of just the previous killer's abilities, then I think you could just leave it at that. You don't need to give them the total stack that might make them sweep the floor. Personally, I really love the idea of this game mode because it gives people a chance to play killers that they may not have purchased before. In my mind, this would be a great way for Behavior to sell some of their DLC because instead of just telling people, trust us, it's gonna be fun, they can actually show people that it will be fun to play with these killers. And since this is a time-sensitive event, it's not like this would go on forever and people will never buy the DLC. Instead, people would be much more likely to buy the DLC as soon as the event's over, and I think it could be a really big moneymaker for Behavior. But regardless of the money-making aspects, I just think it would be super fun to see killers and survivors have to play in totally different ways within the same match, and not really know what they're gonna go up against in just a short amount of time. But now that we've wrapped that game mode up, let's move on to the second game mode, which is Kill v Kill. Kill v Kill, or Kill versus Kill, is a concept I came up with for people who love to play both Survivor and Killer and can never really choose which one they want to play. This would essentially pit 5 different people against each other in 5-minute rounds, where everybody gets a chance to be the killer. Instead of the survivors trying to escape, they would basically just try to run away and hide from the killer, kind of like hide and seek, and the killer would try to get as many people down as possible, with people respawning every time they get hooked. So essentially, you would get points for every hit, every down, and every hook in different amounts based off of what seems to be the most balanced. And then whoever has the most points at the end of the 5 rounds wins the whole game. There would definitely need to be a few limitations in order to make this game mode work. For example, you would definitely need to have a time limit, like I said, and you'd want to have it pretty short so that way it doesn't take like a couple hours to complete a game. Additionally, you would need to have a much smaller map to accommodate for that short time frame because you can't really spend the whole time just running around trying to find one person. Like I said, you would definitely need to have people respawn once they get hooked, otherwise, again, you're gonna run out of people to get and then you're just gonna kind of sit there until the timer runs out. And you would have to have either a preset build or limitations on the build for both survivors and killers. That way you can ensure that the matches are pretty fair, and you can also make sure that the game flows very well given the other constraints. Overall, I think this would be super fast-paced, fun, even kind of scary because you're just going to be constantly getting downed and you'll get to play as both the survivor and the killer, so you get to have your payback moment. I just think it would be super fun and a total change of pace from normal DBD. Now for the third game mode, this is Cornfield Maze Escape, and it is basically exactly what it sounds like. If you've ever been to a cornfield in autumn, then you know that farmers like to make little mazes out of them. Sometimes there'll be scary ones with like masked people in them chasing you, and sometimes they'll just be family-friendly ones where you try to find your way out. This would be much more like the former one, where you would essentially have multiple killers and multiple survivors in a giant, procedurally generated corn maze, and the survivors try to escape and the killers try to hook the survivors. So it would be very much like normal DBD, just set inside a corn maze and without having to do the generators. But you would also have a couple of other aspects, like you would have to give survivors some kinds of ways to stun killers, so maybe everybody gets a flashlight, you would have pallets still, or maybe even other features that would allow you to stun killers and make for a quick escape. And to balance this, killers might have an ability to maybe play hot and cold and find where a survivor is, maybe with like an opposite terror radius. So something of that nature to make sure that both parties have a fun time trying to either hunt or escape. This game mode might be kind of difficult for Behavior to implement, but if they could pull it off, it would be beloved by everybody, I'm certain of it. It just has such a good Halloween vibe. I think if they ran it for the month of October some year, it would be super fun. People would definitely sign on just to play this. And you really get that DBD vibe without just having to play the normal DBD gameplay. And speaking of the normal DBD gameplay, we have to talk about the meta. I really dislike the meta. I actually think it is one of the biggest reasons why DBD has kind of become unfun over the years, and I've talked about this a few times on this channel. But I think that to kind of combat this, you could have a secondary game mode that is basically just normal DBD, but you would have randomized perks. I think this would be so wild, very similar to the rotating killers mode, where essentially no one would really know what they're playing with, so you can't really have a swift team that's like fully optimized and going out there to destroy a killer, and likewise you can't have a sweaty killer who only knows 4 perks because they heard they're the best ones for the meta, and then they just go run those all the time and become really good. You might have some really interesting things happen through this kind of game mode where, for example, you might have people find some interesting perk combinations they hadn't considered before. And likewise, you might find that some perks are totally non-synergistic with each other, and that's fine because this isn't a very serious mode. One thing you would have to do to balance this game mode is ensure that survivors can't have any overlapping perks. Since everything's randomized, I think you could actually do this pretty easily, and this would prevent people from getting a bunch of perks that are just totally useless between all 4 survivors, or likewise, you wouldn't have 4 people with the best perk in the entire game. It would just be totally at random. Everybody gets different things, and that way you're not going to complain about, oh, everybody just happened to get the best things in the game, or everybody happened to get the absolute worst ones. Like I said, I think this would be kind of easy for Behavior to implement because you don't actually have to change anything about the core gameplay. You're just changing how people choose perks in that they can't choose them. And that just kind of adds a little bit of variety to the game, but doesn't really require a huge commitment from Behavior to make it feel like DBD because it's basically the same game. But something that would feel very different is our next game mode, which is King of the Hill. If you're not really familiar with King of the Hill, this childhood game is basically where you have one person who is the king of the hill, and everybody has to try to take them down in order to become the new king of the hill. And that is basically how this game mode would work. It would basically be reverse DBD, where you would have one killer who has to try to fend off all of the survivors coming at them at one time. And the survivors, if they can manage to like stun or drain HP from the killer, they would become the new killer, and whoever's the killer at the end of the match is the winner. Additionally, every time a survivor becomes the killer, everyone would reset. That way you don't have people just kind of centralized in one location for the entire match. You would ensure that everyone kind of gets a fair chance at being the killer if they manage to get to the killer first. And some people might choose to not even go to the killer. They might choose to fight each other because they don't want the other people to get to the killer, and that would also be totally fine. It might get kind of annoying at times, but I think it would also be very silly, and since this is a game mode that would be temporary, it's not like people are going to be mad in the long term. Overall, I would be very interested to see a Dead by Daylight with people actually going toward the killer. It's almost kind of funny to think about the killer possibly getting jump scared by survivors instead of the other way around. So I would really hope that they could put out a game mode like this at some point in time, just for the fun of it. But now we are finally at our last two game modes, and these game modes are two sides of the same coin, both called Speed Round. The first Speed Round is Killer Speed Round, and this is a huge map filled with tons of survivors that are AI controlled, and you have several different killers all competing to be the best killer. This would work very similarly to Kill v Kill that I mentioned earlier, except instead of all the survivors getting a chance to be killer, you have multiple killers all going after AI controlled survivors, and you would see how many people everyone can get in a short amount of time, and whoever gets the most maybe kills or the most hooks in a certain amount of time would be the winner. This is a pretty simple idea. I think it would be kind of difficult because you would have to have a good number of AI controlled survivors, but it is still possible, and I think it would be something totally different to see several different killers on the same map all at once, all going after survivors, and since the survivors aren't real people, I don't really see any reason why people would complain about this game mode. I especially don't think anyone would complain because you could run it at the same time as Speed Round Survivor. The Survivor Speed Round is very similar to the Killer Speed Round, except instead of trying to get the most number of kills in a short amount of time, you are trying to either totally avoid getting KO'd in that amount of time, or you're trying to get hooked the least number of times and maybe you respawn in. Instead of having a bunch of AI controlled survivors, you would have a good number of AI controlled killers, and same kind of thing happens, you just try to avoid everybody and hide. The benefit of including both of these game modes at one time is you wouldn't really have as many matchmaking issues as if you included one at a time, and you could also kind of compare the two game modes if you like playing as Survivor and Killer, and kind of see which one you like more, and maybe the different strategies for each, kind of make fun of the AI when they do stupid things, and overall just have a fun time. Overall, my whole goal with this video was just to explain how Behavior could really have some fun with creating Dead by Daylight content. It doesn't just have to be DLC, it doesn't just have to be characters, it can be new game modes, it can be fun things that take away the tension of the usual gameplay and give something special back to the fans. I really hope they consider doing some new game modes in the future, whether it's on Dead by Daylight or maybe a future Dead by Daylight 2. I would love to see what they could come up with because I know they're all very talented people over there at Behavior, and I'm sure that they could come up with some really fun concepts. But let me know what you think. Do you think that Behavior should implement any of these game modes? Do you think they will implement game modes now or in the future? And do you have any ideas for other game modes that you would like to see in DBD? Definitely leave me a comment to let me know if you have any interesting ideas. And also make sure to like and subscribe if you like this content. I'm sure I will be making more DBD videos in the future, but I also make other gaming analysis content and would love for you to stick around and check it out. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.